Hi, everyone. Welcome to this edition of the Agronomists. I am your host, Lindsay Smith, and I'm also laughing only a little in that I realized just before we went live that I didn't know how to say one of our guests' last name. Hey, hello to Warren and to Patrick and to Ray, to Benko, and Pete is in the comments. All right, great to see everybody. I was wondering where John was. I know Farmer Schneck, Warren was finishing planting last week, so we will forgive your absence 1 week, but I'm glad to see you back. All right. Before we get started with tonight's show, which I'm super excited about, it's going to be a great conversation. Glad you could all be here. I do want to remind all of our viewers, of course, that you do qualify for CEU credits if you do collect them. So head on over to realagriculture.com/agronomists to collect your CEU credits. The post will be up tomorrow morning, so you can do that. And then, of course, the show would not be possible without our wonderful sponsor. So a big thank you, of course, to Adama Canada, to the Mind Your Farm Business podcast, and to our flea beetle beatdown webinar that's happening next Tuesday, July 5th at 8 a.m. Quick shout out to Adama Canada, of course. While other sources of innovation run dry, Adama is here to deliver, leveraging the world's largest library of actives to provide innovative crop protection solutions to your greatest challenges. We're all in on you. Talk to your Adama sales rep today. Woo! Okay, so with that, I'm pretty proud we're starting on time. Of our guests today, one guest has been here once before, and the other, this is their first agronomist. I'm super excited. Okay, so tonight we're going to talk about diagnosing nutrient deficiencies, tips and tricks, what you can do to do so, why it pays to pay attention to what the plants are telling you. And to have that discussion, I've got Jack Payne with South Country Co-op and Colin Elgie with OMAFRA. Colin, did I get it right?
You got it right. I get
Woo!
all kinds of
Okay.
things, so don't worry about it.
Okay, I tried. And Jack, how are you tonight?
Really good, Lindsay. You didn't tell me Ray DeBenko was going to be on this. Now the pressure is really on. Oh my gosh.
He asked the toughest questions. So Ray, bring him for Jack. Bring him. Ray is often in the comments, and we appreciate it very much. Always there for a little levity and some great challenges to questions. And every once in a while, he answers a question when we don't know. So that's okay. All right, I'm going to start where I always begin, of course, and that's what things are like in the field where you are. Jack, I'll start with you. What part of Alberta are you in, and how do things look?
Well, I cover southern Alberta, so that's where I started my career with Alberta agriculture, and now I've come full circle. I'm back to southern Alberta. So actually was just down scouting some canola fields today, and things have improved greatly. I mean, 2 to 3 weeks ago, I mean, we were still reeling, wondering if we were going to be caught in this drought. Is it going to rain? Is it going to rain? We had some, very, very dry conditions. And then we got a little bit of rain and it wasn't enough. And then 2 weeks ago, the taps have turned on and, we've gotten anywhere from 4 to 8 to 9 inches of rain, depending on the locality. So things have improved greatly. There's probably a few areas that are still looking for a little bit more, but,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to complain. The rain could have come a week or 10 days sooner, but we'll take what we've got and things have improved greatly. So, I don't think
Good.
anybody's complaining.
No, sooner and perhaps just in smaller amounts. If we could modify it at all.
Yeah.
Those giant rain events can be a bit tough on fields. Now, Colin, I rumor has it you're down in the Ridgetown area. How do
Yeah,
things look
that's
there?
right. Uh, it's kind of a mixed bag. For the most part, things look very good. It's actually quite dry here now. After a bit of a delayed spring, its taps kind of turned off. There are some areas that had a big rain that earlier on that kind of pushed things back. So there's some areas that some really delayed planting and some replants just from the heavy rains.
Hmm.
But for the most part, across the countryside, crops look pretty good. Could use a shower, but um, really we're nothing to complain about too much.
Good. All right, now, Colin, We should very quickly note that you're relatively new to your role, and this is pretty exciting. And I don't know if you've noticed this or not, but when OMAFRA fills a position, most farmers across the province get very excited. So we're all very excited that you're here. So, what is your title, and when did you start your role?
So I am the new soil fertility specialist for field crops. Um, yeah, based out of Ridgetown, and so I started mid-May, so I'm about a month and a half into the job now.
You are a brave soul coming on this show. Okay, so and Peter says Colin hasn't been looking at many wheat fields. Peter, that's because wheat doesn't matter. Anyway, we're going to talk about just in Ontario, right? Anyway, I will say, not that anyone asked, but I am west of Ottawa, and I would say we are in the things look really good boat, but definitely seeing some corn that could probably use a drink or would like a drink. It's gonna be just fine, but we are perhaps with the heat we've had, maybe a little dry. Yes, Peter, I'm coming for you. Okay. All right, let's though. We've got some really great photos. We've got some good videos, some clips to get through tonight. So, Jack, maybe let's kick things off with just a little discussion on 4Rs. Okay. So, because we're talking about nutrient deficiencies, I mean, we're talking about where we were lacking in nutrients, but
Mm-hmm.
how does something like the 4R stewardship of phosphorus and nitrogen play into sort of the overall nutrient package?
Well, okay, so I guess our topic's deficiency. So right rate. I mean, if we've addressed the issue of the right rate up front, we hopefully don't have deficiencies. So that's the plan, and that's what we're striving for when we're doing our fertilizer recommendations and soil sampling. Is to meet what's the target yield, how much NPKs and micros do we need, to reach that target yield. Now, this year, the curveball that was thrown at us was the $1,200, $1,300 a ton fertilizer prices, where people were, ouch, ouch. How does that impact things? And of course, price definitely, budget, when you're penciling out a crop budget, that certainly comes in. And fertilizer, let's face it, is one of the biggest input costs, that the growers face. So when we're seeing astronomically high fertilizer prices, now growers had to look at, okay, so how much do I put down? What is the rate? Do I target what I normally put down, or do I dial it back? Now, the thing that was mitigating that, of course, was commodity prices. They were looking really good and still looking fairly decent. So, I mean, there was a mitigating factor there of prices. And so, when you start penciling it out in terms of ROI, there was still some benefit to going with some of the rates. Now, the thing that got us in southern Alberta is last year was a heck of a drought, or all of Western Canada was a heck of a drought. And we've actually had in southern Alberta dry years, through 2018, 2017 kind of thing. So that has been something that's overridden a lot of growers is that, the cash flow. I mean, literally in some cases, cash flow was very, very tight. But anyway, hopefully the idea of 4R is we try to meet the crop target, yield target, so we don't have a deficiency. I mean, we don't want to be playing catch up, because once you're behind, it's tough. You always will be behind. I mean, the best that we can do is to try and perhaps, do a rescue treatment if we've got a deficiency, but that's not what we're striving for. So the first R of the right rate is hugely important.
I've always wondered, is it always in the same order, right rate, right place, right time, right form? Did I get that right? So is there an
Right
actual
rate.
order? Because I
Well,
just say
rate,
them in whatever order.
the right rate, the right source, right time, and the right place.
Okay,
Something now they, again, when you're looking at rate, that will determine what your placement is, because obviously,
right,
if you need a high rate of fertilizer and you have got a single shoot system, you can't put all that down, in the seed row
right.
without injuring the crop. So that does have an impact, a big implication on terms of that, in terms of influencing that. Then the sources. Okay, so what do we got for fertilizer sources? Can you apply a product that is safer in the seed row? We want to try and reduce losses. So does that change the source of nitrogen, that we use? So, yeah, they all intertwine, but usually we start with the rate, because that's the driving factor.
Okay. See, I just learned something. So there you go. All right, now, Colin, we've got some really great photos that we will get to tonight. We're gonna play a bit of what the heck happened here, but that's one of my questions for you. You know, when you're scouting, when a grower calls and says, you know, something's going on, what am I doing here? What what pieces of information are you writing down, taking into account, asking about to try and get to the bottom of which nutrient or why that nutrient is potentially deficient?
Yeah, so usually I start with everything that has gone on in the field. So the whole management system that the individual field has had really plays a huge amount into the effect of what's going on there. So if we go back to the 4 R's, what source did you put on? So, did you put on the right phosphorus fertilizer, the right potassium, the right nitrogen, etc., the right rate? So, did you put enough on for this crop? Is it a heavy user of something like phosphorus? If we look at the right placement, so, did you put this phosphorus fertilizer in a band close to that seedling? And then the right time, is it getting it at the right time that it needs it? So those 4 R's, as Jack mentioned, they all come into play with everything that we're trying to figure out in the field. A lot of times it's something weather related, and so
Mm.
we've got to figure out, when you were in that field, what were the conditions like? Is it Are you dealing with something like compaction or crusting or flooding? um, Smeared sidewalls, because all of that can play a huge role into the amount of nutrients that that plant can take up, especially early in season. And so
Mhm.
the most important thing I find is figuring out, every pass that's been made across that field since the last time you soil sampled, what's gone on. And the soil sample is such a key part in it too, that it's really your first piece of evidence as to what is actually occurring in this spot. So there's really as much information as you can get from that field, the better to try and figure everything out.
That's a really great way to phrase it, I think, is every pass that's happened on that field since it was last soil sampled. What if you don't have a soil sample though, like a relatively current one?
And then
Because
get one.
okay, because I happen to know, myself included, that some fields are behind on said soil samples. So that's the reality you're faced with, of course. So what if you don't have, let's say, a soil sample that's less than 2 years old? Where do you start? What do you do then? Colin, I'll start with you, and then Jack, same question.
All right. So I guess when you're first looking out in the field, you're looking for specific visual clues to kind of guide you as to what you're looking at. Um, you're looking at leaf tissue. So, are there patterns in there? Are there things like chlorosis in the leaves? Is there purpling, yellowing? Um, every different crop has a little bit different symptoms for different nutrients. So, you're
Mhm.
really looking for those visual clues to start with. Another thing that you're kind of looking at that's not directly on the plant, but I find a lot of times gives you a pretty good idea, is tracks in the field. So if you can see a tire track that's following the same pattern as the deficiency shows, a lot of times you can take a pretty educated guess as to what that would be.
Jack, what do you think?
Well, Lindsay, I'm going to default to a philosophy that was taught to me very early in my career by a former colleague, Norm Flory with Wesco Fertilizers, and he drilled it into our head, and I conveyed that even when I was at Olds College to our students. You can't positively identify a nutrient deficiency just from visual symptoms. You need a soil test or a tissue test or a combination of both.
Mhm.
So yes, we have visual indicators that tells us that there's a possible nutrient deficiency, but going back to Colin's comments, you don't get one. Now, sometimes we can't wait for a soil test if it's a
Yeah.
situation where the crop has gone off the rails and looks like we need to act on something. Okay, now we have to sort of, use the gut feel and use our experience and visual symptoms to drill it down. But exactly like Colin has said, okay, let's go back now and start looking at what had been done on the field and what the crop plan has been. So what have you applied previously for NPKs? What was the previous crop? What was the yield? Because we can do some quick math, I guess, in terms of removal rates and get an idea of, how much NPKS was maybe pulled out of that field the previous year, or whether there might be some carryover. But, again, to do it with just strictly the visual symptoms, we need to confirm it. And, even afterwards, it's still a good idea, because then it instills, I guess, confidence in the agronomist that, yes, we made the right call. Or if we missed the mark, I'll be quite honest. We don't all bat 1,000. And if we have missed the mark, okay, well, maybe it's not a nutrient deficiency. Guess what? Maybe it's something else. And so now we go back and start looking at what other possible causes could be causing these symptoms.
Back to the drawing board. Also, Colin, you should know that Peter Johnson has voluntold you to take soil samples for farmers. So if they don't have one, they're supposed to call you, and you will come and take one for them. So there you go. You can take that up with him later. Okay. Great points. And Jack, great point there on verifying, right? So we're taking what we see in the field, we're taking our field history, and if we don't have that soil test, tissue testing is an option, a current soil test is an option, and sometimes we have to rule out a deficiency. And so Peter is jumping the gun on one of my questions, but I'll take it now, I guess. Pete asks, how much faith do you put in tissue tests? And I'm feeling my oats today, Peter. So I would say, well, that depends. But Jack, I'll start with you. How much faith do you put in them? Where do you use them? Where do they really fit?
Well, like any test, Lindsay, they're not bulletproof. There's always room for error. So, we have to take it, with a grain of salt. But they are an indicator. Micronutrients can be a little, more iffy, or a little bit harder to pin down, because there's variation between labs in terms of their critical values and that sort of thing. And again, you're talking micros, which are, fractions, decimals of a pound sort of thing that we're dealing with. So, again, they are an indicator. Macronutrients are a little more reliable. Again, a lot of things come into play. The time of sampling, how the sample was stored, how it was shipped. Did it get to the lab in time? So there can be a lot of variables in there that can influence it. And again, to be quite honest, no lab test of any kind, even a water test, there's always margin for error or possibility that that it can be off. But certainly, it's better than not having anything at all. But I put a lot of faith, I think, in macronutrients. Micros might be a little bit tougher to dial down. And I'll be very honest. At Olds College, we had a situation where we had corn that to me looked like we had zinc or iron deficiency, because it was textbook, absolutely textbook. Sent the samples into the lab, and even when the lab got them, the guy said, "Oh my gosh, these are textbook samples," he said. And guess what? When the analysis came back, it said, "No, the zinc and the iron is good." I said, you know what? I think I'm still going to go with my hunch. And so I recommended that they go with a micronutrient blend into the next application. And sure enough, it pulled through. So, I guess some of this goes back to agronomy. It's the art and the science. Sometimes you got to trust the gut. You got to trust your experience. And sometimes you got to trust your grower's experience too. If they've been farming a piece of land for a long time, they've seen a lot of things on that, and they may have some really good information they can share with you.
Mm-hmm. Colin, how do you feel about tissue tests? Love them or leave them?
I'd say I love them. They're much better information than we've currently got, just by looking at the plant. Yeah, I agree with Jack 100%. They're not perfect. There's such small differences in some of the nutrients from a critically low level to a very high level. But in most cases, you can kind of confirm your suspicions with a visual diagnosis, and a lot of times where you've got a deficiency that doesn't really fit into any one category as far as visual symptoms, you can kind of put a tissue test together, send it away, and get a much better idea of what you're looking at. So I think it's something that is an additional tool that we've got that in the case of
Yeah.
nutrient deficiencies, we might as well use it.
Yep. Good stuff. Okay, I like that. And Pete is already headed down a rabbit hole that I plan to go to. Peter, this is worrying me just a little that I feel like he's in my brain, and that's a bit scary. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go, producer Jay, if you could go to our second clip. We're going to do the second one first because it's my show. I can do what I want. And this one is actually about boron deficiency. And so it ties into Peter's question really well. So let's go to the clip here. This is a Corn School episode on boron deficiency.
Hey, I want to talk to you about something you've seen this year. You know, you walk a lot of fields, see a lot of things throughout the year. This year, you saw some boron deficiency. Tell me about it.
Yeah, so boron is something that, to be honest, really wasn't on my radar prior to this year. What happened was there was a grower that called up his dealer and said, hey, something funny's going on. You want to come down and take a look? The dealer took a look. He called me up and said, you got to get down here, Drew. And so down we went, and this is kind of what we ran into. So we had a whole bunch. The majority of the field had some nice cobs looking really good, but there was a bunch that looked like this. And so this is obviously not what you want to see. Normally I would see something like that, and I would just say, you probably, an insect bit it. It was planted too shallow, it emerged late. But then when you started walking through the field, you realize there was more of this in there than you'd like to see. There was a little bit of a pattern to it where it was showing up worse. And so, yeah, we basically figured we better take a little bit deeper dive.
Yeah. Now, I was going to say, what are some of the characteristics of those plants? I mean, from a tasseling perspective, that give it away.
So absolutely. So the first thing we notice is this poor pollination. And so yes, we had some hot and dry weather, but obviously we had some great pollination, bit of tip back, but nothing unusual. But the big thing that really jumped out to me was when we start looking at the tassels. And so here we are with our good plant. We've got a nice, normal, healthy looking tassel. And here's our poor plant, and we've got a very small, spindly, almost non-existent tassel. When I read through the literature, what would cause a small tassel to form, and basically the research suggested boron. Boron is very important in the meristem, so where the plant is growing, and so you've got a meristem at the cob, you've got a meristem at the tassel, and that's where the boron needs to go. If there's no boron, you don't get that cell division, you end up with a smaller cob, you end up with a smaller tassel.
Right.
So with that in mind, we sort of said, hey, we better get out there and actually confirm this. And so we pulled some tissue samples. We took what we thought were the good looking plants, we pulled some tissue off of that, we grabbed what we thought were the poor looking plants, we grabbed some off, submitted it to the lab. The results came back. We basically analyzed for everything that the lab could do, and the vast majority of nutrients were no difference between the good plant and the poor plant, but what really jumped out was the boron. The boron level was less than 10% up in the poor plant to what it was in the good plant, so very low.
So boron is a micronutrient that not a lot of growers pay attention to. How do you get it on your radar screen?
Well, and that's just it. So those that are growing alfalfa, they're thinking about it all the time. It's very important and used quite widely in alfalfa. Those that are dealing with some of the higher value horticultural crops, they know the importance of it as well. But really, boron is one of those nutrients that moves within the soil. It's an anion. It's basically released from the minerals of the soil, and that's where we get most of it. And most of the time, we've got enough of it. But when you start getting into dry weather, and so dry weather means that it's not releasing from the soil, and it's also not in the soil solution to get into the plant, and so we are really scratching our head at the moment saying, how do we recommend it? But if we talk about corn, 10-15 years ago we shot for 200 bushel, and with better management of our NP and K, our macronutrients, we got up to that 200 bushel. But now that we're going for the bigger numbers and shooting for 250, and we've got this beautiful corn crop behind us that hopefully is going to hit that 250 number, we're starting to realize we really need to start focusing more on our micronutrients, and boron is one of them.
Right.
All right. Okay. So lots of good questions coming in on the chat. I really appreciate all those coming in. Thanks so much for that. We've got some really good leaping off points here. I did quickly just want to send a shout out to our show sponsors, to Adama Canada, to the Mind Your Farm Business podcast, and to our members only webinar slated for July 5th. It's going to be 8 a.m. Mountain Time. We'll have Drs. Boyd Morey and James Tansey on to talk about flea beetle management. Bigger picture, where we're at, there were definitely some major challenges with flea beetles this spring, probably still ongoing, to be honest. And we're going to tackle some of those in the webinar. So if you are not a member on the Real Agriculture website, get yourself signed up so you can access that. And we'll have more information in the coming days on the website. Okay, heading back to this boron question. So I find it fascinating because, of course, and we are going to talk a bit about phosphorus, we're going to talk about nitrogen, we're going to talk about all those sorts of things. But when it comes to the micros, it's fascinating to me to see, because they're needed in such teeny amounts, when they're missing, you can see some really striking changes in the plant, which is really cool. So Pete asks, and Jack, will start with you because it's in Alberta, but Colin, I think this is something that we'll talk about as well. A grower in Alberta has awesome looking wheat, wants to know what he could do better, takes tissue samples. Everything is good except boron, which is way low. What does he do? So, Jack, what say you?
I guess what I would do, we've got the tissue sample. Do we have any previous soil tests where they analyze the soil? Because is this a problem that's existing in the soil, or do we have adequate boron in the soil and it's just not in the plant? I mean, if the tissue test says it's not in the plant, okay, it's an issue because it's not in the plant. But do we have it? Do we have it in the soil? Now, deficiency symptoms, hard to tell with boron. I mean, we do get some of them. To be honest, boron can be a problem. We've usually associate boron deficiencies with things like alfalfa and canola. There's been a lot of hype and a lot of recognition about that. So when we talk about wheat, it might be something where it's not even on the radar. They're going like, "What do you mean boron for wheat?" And again, you don't need very much of it. Now, if that is the only nutrient that is deficient, if that is why the crop is looking so pitiful, then we could certainly look at probably a foliar, depending on the stage of the crop, a foliar application to mitigate that. Because again, micronutrients, foliar applications work quite well because again, usually it's a small amounts, and so you could do a rescue treatment to consider that. But again, I always go back to soil tests. And again, you don't have to do micronutrient tests every single year, but it's always nice to have a baseline. What's that field? Where is it? Where has it been sitting? And of course, the other factor we need to consider are some of the other things like soil pH and things like that, because pH does influence availability of micronutrients. And so I'm always looking for a cause and effect. So why do we have a boron deficiency? Why? Okay, we can maybe treat it with a foliar, but what's the cause? Why is that crop deficient? And is it a situation where we've got some other factors of soil quality that are maybe impacting that? So I always like to fall back on that soil test.
Now, Colin, shifting the question somewhat, in that what Jack has also mentioned is that there's a difference between, of course, a nutrient being there in the soil and being available, and weather, and specifically moisture being high and or low, can significantly impact the availability of certain nutrients. So how does the weather play into when we see potentially deficiencies we didn't expect, or something like a boron deficiency based on the fact that perhaps it's been super wet and then turned dry or something like that?
Yeah, and so a lot of nutrients, especially your soluble nutrients, they move with the water in the soil. So things like nitrogen, sulfur, boron, they're all very soluble. So when we've had a lot of rains, real wet, saturated conditions, that's when you tend to see a lot of those nutrient deficiencies showing up. So with the example of boron, it could be you're limiting on your boron levels from your soil test, but the conditions arise that boron isn't available to that crop. that's when you can really see something like that stick out. And so
Mm.
9 times out of 10, if your soil test levels are decent, you're not going to see a deficiency unless there's an additional stress on that plant. So things
Okay.
like flooding, drought, heat, cold, basically anything that's making that plant bits more stress than usual. It's going to really accentuate any little difference in nutrients that's in the soil.
Mm-hmm.
So in the case of the boron, I I think your best bet is to test it out. Put a foliar application on of boron. Make sure you leave a check strip so you know, but test it out. That's how you find out. Is my crop really boron deficient, or is it just a certain time of year that it's taking up more than what that soil holds at any one time? Are the conditions such that foliar application will pay under these conditions and not normally? So I think it's something you gotta really test out and make sure you leave it checked so you know.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Um, Yes. So you get the 2 thumbs up from Peter saying yes, plots. Make sure you leave a test strip, maybe a couple, so that you can actually get some indication on what happened. Now, again, of course, that may not inform what you do this year because, of course, you've done the application, but it gives you a learning lesson, right? We actually will be able to say this is what we had, these are the conditions we had. It worked, it didn't work, what would we do differently next time? So definitely really appreciate that. Okay, I want to bring up Jack. Let's bring Jay, if you could bring up Jack's photo that he sent us. I want to play a quick game because we have some smarty pants in the comments. And so this is an image um of something,
Barley.
and I want everyone to try and guess. No, I mean, well, yes. Okay, yes, it's barley. Jack, maybe give us the field background and then everyone can try and guess what happened here.
Okay, so this was a field that I came across in central Alberta a number of years ago, and we walked out into the field, and you're going like, "Whoa, look at this, a line." Okay, so when we see a line, you know it's something mechanical, you know it's something equipment related, or was it just a different variety?
Okay, so does anyone in the comments have a guess as to what they think occurred here? Anyone at all? I'm gonna give you 5 seconds, then we're gonna talk about it. But I feel like there's a few of you that should know what this is. Oh my goodness, Warren. He says, did Lindsay's sheep get out and graze on the left? Listen, Warren, had they done so, it would have tillered more and it would have added to yield. Just kidding. So Ray says, was phosphorus seed placement missing? Jack, is Ray DeBenko right?
Ray DeBinko is 100% on, absolutely, and I
Oh,
wouldn't have expected anything less, to be quite honest. So,
absolutely. All right. So what happened here?
well, the story on this one is actually the age old thing that happened. The farmer shut down for lunch, came back, started up the tractor, started up the air seeder, started down the field, and forgot to turn the phosphate on. So this is basically just the only difference you've got is lack of phosphate. And the reason I threw this one in here was because actually we have an ongoing chat with our staff kind of thing, and somebody had circulated a photo of a plant and it was all purple and whatever, and somebody jumped to the conclusion, well, phosphorus, because that's when you look at the textbook and even when you look at the CCA guidelines, purpling of the plant is a phosphate deficiency. Well, that's not always the case. And in fact, I've only ever seen maybe once or twice in my career, plants that were showing purpling from lack of phosphate. The, the biggest one that I see in terms of a deficiency symptom is delayed maturity. And you look at this, you look at the plants, you've got lots of plants. Actually, the plants on the left don't look bad. I mean, if you didn't have that strip on the right, if you were just looking at the one on the left, you'd say, well, I don't think there's anything wrong here. Okay, maybe it's, it still hasn't headed out, but I wouldn't be pushing any panic button. But when you get a situation here like this, now you do. And I guess the reason I threw that in there, Lindsay, is people like Norm Flory and myself, we've been kind of concerned about what we call the phosphate deficiency or phosphate crisis that we've got in Western Canada, because we have not been applying enough phosphate in our crops. We haven't been keeping up with demand. Let's put it that way. Typically, when you look at phosphorus that's put down, you know, because of equipment limitations, placement, that sort of thing, we're shortchanging ourselves. Many 20, 30 pounds of phosphorus per year, and so we are drawing that the pool of phosphate in our soil right down, and it's to a situation where I'm a little bit concerned because we can't keep up. So what you may have is a deficiency that maybe if you didn't have anything to compare this to, you might just say, well, that variety is just kind of sucks. It's 5 days behind. I don't know if I want to grow that anymore. Well, was it really the variety, or is it the fact that maybe we're shortchanging ourselves on phosphate, and that's what's showing up? So just wanted to throw that one in there because again, people always default to a textbook symptom, and the textbook doesn't always show up in the field.
Looks to me like you need some hog manure. All right. So, see, not sheep manure, hog manure. Great question from Andy. And Colin, I'll put this to you. We've talked about adding those micros potentially with a foliar application, but we could, of course, put them on potentially with a liquid product. Does a Y drop application, so a soil application, need to be chelated? Warren saying no. Colin, what do we need to know about chelated product or not?
So chelated products are really formed to get into the leaf tissue, specifically get inside that plant. So a soil application through Y drops, no, you don't need a chelated form of the nutrient. Really, you want your ideally cheapest available source of that micronutrient. So you want it. A Y drop's pretty ideal for a soil placement just because you're getting it right close to that rooting zone. And yeah, you're looking for just your cheapest source of available micronutrient, depending on what you're looking for.
So, but if it's foliar, you want to make sure it's a chelated product because that will allow it to actually get into the plant.
Yeah, and really for a chelated product, you can get away with a much lower rate of that actual micronutrient. So a non-chelated product, I guess one that's common around here would be manganese sulfate. You need generally a higher rate of that actual micronutrient, just because it's not as efficient at getting in through that
Right.
leaf.
Okay. All right. Good to know. Colin, you're the soil nutrient specialist. What are we talking about foliar for? You're supposed to tell me to go take a hike. No, I'm just kidding. I do appreciate it. But yes, no, absolutely. Now, okay, so we did though mention purpling, and we have Colin. You've got a picture of some purple corn plants.
Mhm.
Jay, can you bring that up for us? Let's see what we got. Dun da da da. Is my internet slow? Maybe Jay fell asleep. So here we go. We've got some purple plants. Does anyone want to guess? Oh, so what happened here? Is this phosphorus?
Well, it's kind of the exact opposite of Jack's example there. So these are purple plants. This is early in season. Corn corn came up out of the ground, absolutely normal. The field that it was planted in, you can see again, like Jack mentioned, a direct line straight through the field. Corn on one side of the line was purple, corn on the other side perfectly green, just a nice beautiful crop. Purple corn's noticeably stunted, and obviously quite striking when you're driving by just to see a whole section of the field that's, wow, that is textbook phosphorus deficiency. And so
And is that what it was?
so it was phosphorus deficiency, but it was caused by the rotation. So
Ah,
the corn was grown after a sugar beet crop. Sugar beets are a non-mycorrhizal crop, and so really it's the lack of the mycorrhizal fungi that should be in the soil, and so it's just a matter of that soil, even though it's a moderately high testing phosphorus soil. There's no starter put on with the corn, and so
mhm.
we're seeing that phosphorus deficiency just because those roots have such a small mass that they're able to get to. And
So no, go ahead. Well, I'm just going to say gold star to Jason Vogt and Ray DeBanco, who said fallow, so fallow syndrome, or after canola, lack of mycorrhizal populations. So here in the West, of course, it would be canola that is that non-mycorrhizal crop, but sugar beets also as well. So go ahead, Colin. Yes, the background details really matter. This is so cool. Okay, go ahead.
Yep.
Sorry.
Absolutely. And I was just going to mention that's the magical part about the mycorrhiza, just how important they are to that plant, especially for something like phosphorus. It's hardly mobile in the soil whatsoever, and just being able to get the enhanced root network with that fungi, that's able to access those nutrients and feed it into the plant. It's just amazing at the interaction between those two organisms to really make it work.
Yeah, really stunning. Okay, that is super cool. Now we do have a few other photos, but I want to leave them till we get back from our second clip, which is actually the first clip. I'm sorry, Jay. But this one, Pete, you're in this one, so you'll be happy. And Joanna Fallings is in this one as well. So we are going to talk about the world's best crop, wheat. And we're going to talk a little bit about sulfur. So Jay, if you can run the clip, please.
I'm Mike Cobra, weed specialist with the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs. I'm here with Joanna Fallings, our provincial cereal specialist, and we're tackling the issue of sulfur deficiency. And so Joanna, if we look across the province, are we starting to see more sulfur deficiency pop up, and why?
Yeah, so in the last number of years, we are seeing sulfur deficiency more, particularly in the winter wheat crop, as a result of cool, prolonged springs. So we're seeing less mineralization, and as a result, as you drive through the countryside, you're seeing these sporadic yellow patching throughout the winter wheat fields.
So I suppose most people are familiar with the need to start getting a little bit of sulfur on their wheat crop. What's the best way to deal with a sulfur deficiency issue?
So the best way to deal with a sulfur deficiency in season is to apply either ammonium thiosulfate in a liquid form with your nitrogen 28%, or with ammonium sulfate with your dry fertilizer, your urea nitrogen, in a broadcast application.
But I suppose there could be an issue where you've even done that and maybe the deficiency is so bad that you still see some localized areas pop up. You're going to go across the field with a sprayer to do herbicide applications or fungicide applications. Do you get questions about could we mix ammonium thiosulfate with herbicides?
Yeah, so we do get questions where growers didn't get a chance to get their sulfur on. The deficiency showed up a bit later, so they're wanting to go in and apply with their herbicides. Historically, we haven't really known what kind of injury that can cause, so we decided to put that to the test here in Woodstock.
I guess like if we think about UAN, sometimes that can really burn wheat leaves, so maybe ammonium thiosulfate would do the same. So what we've done here at the Woodstock Research Station is Joanna and I put together a protocol where we look at 6 gallons per acre of ammonium thiosulfate. So that's what we're putting across all the plots. But we're doing 2 different things. We're adding 1 different herbicide. So we've looked at a lot of the common herbicides in Ontario. And then the second thing is we looked at different levels of water volume. So some people believe that if we mix more water, we dilute the ammonium thiosulfate, maybe we see less leaf burn than if we used a lower water volume. So 6 gallons of ammonium thiosulfate with 14 gallons of water are in half of our plots, and then that same 6 gallons per acre of ammonium thiosulfate with 4 gallons of water are on the other half of the plot. So at the end of the day, we have 20 gallons per acre water of a carrier versus 10 gallons. And so now we're 12 days after application here. We can share with you some of the observations that we've seen. So let's take a closer look. So we're here 9 days after our herbicide applications have been put down. You were here a couple days after. What did you see in terms of injury?
So 2 days after application, when driving up to these research plots, it looked like a checkerboard. You could pick out the research trial amongst all the other research plots in this winter wheat we have here. and it was quite brown across all treatments in all 4 replications.
So just squares of brown on just, is that just leaf burn, or was there anything else?
So there was mostly just leaf burn, but then the interesting part was coming back. We're here now 9 days later, and we essentially drove past the trials not being able to pick it out in this winter wheat. So we've had a significant reduction in injury in the winter wheat field here.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say 2 days after application, you would have been on the phone to the agronomist going, what the heck? And now pretty good. Now, whether that matters for yield or not, who knows?
So my apologies. I forgot it was my Cobra. I thought I pulled the clip with Pete, but I did not. Anyway, okay. We do have some really great questions coming in the chat that on the sulfur question. But just quickly before we continue, of course, our sponsors tonight, Adama Canada, our member-only webinar on Tuesday, July 5th, and of course the Mind Your Farm Business podcast. Listen to all the episodes of Mind Your Farm Business brought to you by RBC Royal Bank by visiting mindyourfarmbusiness.com or wherever you get your podcast. There will be a new Mind Your Farm Business coming up very soon. Some really great topics covered there. Okay, let's dig in our last little bit here. Let's cover a few different things, but on the sulfur question, so interesting one that Warren here in Eastern Ontario shared. He's got a sulfur trial going on, and he has a double application, he says, of sulfur on his wheat that lodged in the last rainstorm. What do we think is going on there? Sulfur and lodging? Any ideas?
Is it just the sulfur that's doubled up, or is it the nitrogen too? ATS has nitrogen in it as well, and I personally I haven't seen a high rate of sulfur causing that, but so it would be if it is nitrogen. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, he says ATS, so so there is nitrogen in there too. Okay, so there you go. So that might be what's at play there, for sure. Okay, so let's talk sulfur a little bit if we can. Now, Jack, you of course would be, I'm going to guess, seeing sulfur deficiency on canola most likely. Where are we at as far as sulfur management? I mean, we did mention boron has maybe come up with canola and alfalfa, but sulfur is also, of course, a hot topic there as well.
Well, this has been really good, Lindsay, because again, we sometimes deal in our own little bubble and forget about what's going on in the rest of the country. Now, sulfur is a big one in Western Canada, and because canola makes up a big portion of growers' rotations. Growers have been, very mindful that they need to apply sulfur, and the canola has a high demand for sulfur. And so when they're growing canola, I don't know of any, growers that don't apply sulfur when they're growing canola. I mean, it's the odd situation where somebody says they're not applying sulfur in their fertilizer blend or somehow. So growers have been very mindful of applying sulfur. So when it comes to sulfur, we've seen, I would say, a decrease in the degree of sulfur deficiencies that we see. And normally we don't see it showing up in wheat like you do in perhaps Eastern Canada. However, if you are experiencing low protein in your wheat, it may be an indicator that you're not meeting the sulfur requirements, because sulfur is an important component of protein. And so if a grower is experiencing, they had a great crop, but the protein levels were a little lower than expected, they're looking at, I thought I had enough nitrogen. Well, maybe, the sulfur wasn't keeping pace with what was needed. So, but we still do see sulfur deficiencies. Oh yes, I've run across sulfur deficiencies. And what we're probably going to see this year in Western Canada is we got areas that are still somewhat dry. We got some areas that are just right. And then we've got Eastern Saskatchewan, parts of Manitoba that were underwater and flooded, and even portions of Alberta, northern Alberta, where they got too much. And it's that leaching component. I mean, you can have decent sulfur reserves in your soil, but when you end up with some leaching problems, too much water, you get the same situation that you got in Ontario, and that your sulfate leaches. And of course, again, that is somewhat soil related, because if you've got sandy or textured soils, leaching is going to be more of a factor. So, it boils back to knowing your fields and soil type. But by and large, for the most part, growers are pretty aware of what they need for sulfur in terms of the application. And again, we kind of struggle almost with, canola tight rotations with canola. So every second year, that field is probably getting a pretty good application of sulfur. And of course, in our irrigated areas, and again, I learned this from Ross McKenzie when I was with Alberta Agriculture. Actually, irrigation water in southern Alberta, usually you're putting on somewhere around 10 pounds of sulfate through the irrigation water, just because that naturally occurs in the river system. So in some cases, we've had mitigating circumstances to look after those deficiencies.
Yeah, okay. Jason Vogt says we should bring back acid rain. No, we shouldn't. But because between that and the hole in the ozone, my childhood was ruined, Jason. I was certain that the world was coming to an end, and I am terrified of acid rain and the hole in the ozone. Okay? I can't. Anyway. All right. Does anybody else remember that? Not that long ago, being terrified that those were the biggest problems. Okay. Anyway, Farmer says, heck yes. Farmer Schneck says, buying sulfurs for the birds. It's, hey, okay, we can give it to the soil and it will give it back. And I'm sorry, but you're going to have to. I know you're only kidding. Jason Fote. Okay. All right. Now, Colin, we've got a couple minutes left. Let's go through some of the other images that you brought tonight and talk about some of the things that you've seen and work through diagnosing. Oh, and then Gord's got a good question. Jay, there we go. Okay, so what the heck happened here? Because this to me looks quite disturbing. I'll be honest.
Yeah, and so when you're out scouting in fields, you're always looking for patterns that are going on. And so you see a dead spot. Your first thought is something messed up here. Did we have a spray issue? Did something happen here that the planter missed? Was there actually anything in this field to begin with? And in this case, it's hard to tell just the way the picture is, but there's a lot of tiny little seedlings that have emerged and then died off. And we in this field we've seen it a whole bunch of different spots along the headlands. And so your first thought is overlap on spray. Well, we looked at his records, his as applied. No, that wasn't the issue. And so we ended up taking some soil tests in the spot. What we ended up figuring out is this is dust coming off the road from the brine that they place on the road. So this is salt burn causing this huge spot in the field next to a road. And so it's something that it's not actually a deficiency, but it's when you're out scouting, you might think, oh, hey, this is a deficiency of something, but there's a multitude of different things that could be causing it.
Wow. So it's actually a toxicity, not a deficiency, but of something completely being added from the road, not a spray tank. Because I would say, yes, like same along what other Ray guessed that. And that's, I'm sure what you looked at as well is, is this a sprayer issue? Is this, so that's wild. So that was salt coming off the road.
Mm-hmm.
Huh. So there you go. Okay. That is very cool. And then what's the next story? What do we got? I love these. Yeah.
Yeah. So this one's a fun one just from this spring. And so a bit of the background in the field is went in nice conditions, great moisture around the seed. It got wet later on, and so we're seeing quite a bit of yellowing in the area. There's some heavy rains, some minor flooding in the fields. But after it started to green up again, we noticed this pattern, and specifically two different patterns in the field. So on the left-hand side, you can see some dark green strips every 40 feet with yellowed corn in between. And on the right-hand side, you can see some very narrow strips on a diagonal to the way the rows are running. And so what happened with this field is the last fall it was split in two. So the left-hand side of the field was soybeans, and it was too wet to get any wheat in. and so it was just left for the fall. On the right hand side, wheat was planted and then got rained out, and the wheat ended up being tile run wheat, so it was sprayed off and the corn was planted. So what we've really figured out is on the left hand side, every 40 feet, we've got fertilizer spreader issues. So it's throwing the nitrogen fertilizer for the starter out far beyond, right to the edges. It's getting a very, very poor spread pattern. And on the right hand side, where the wheat was, we're seeing compaction from just the way that the field was worked. So two very different patterns in the field, and all caused just by the management of the field. So it's every time we go across that field, we've got the issue, or we've got the potential to screw something up, and in this case, we did it two different ways, which was kind of cool.
In one field. There
Yeah.
should be an award. There should be an award for that. Yeah, very cool. Yeah, it's, I mean, and wild to see it, that close together side by side. Yeah, for sure. All right, and I think there's one last photo, and then we do have one question that Gord's asking. Oh, maybe we have two, because I want to get to the one. So yeah, so what are we looking at here?
So this is potassium deficiency, and kind of textbook example. It's yellowed, getting crispy along the edges, starting at the bottom of the leaves. This field, all through the summer, looked excellent. It wasn't until late in the season, after that ear started to grow, ran through a really dry spell, and in a normally otherwise good potassium testing soil, just the lack of water caused that translocation of the potassium moving up the plant, and so you could really see the issues on the leaves there.
Yeah. Okay.
Lindsay?
And last one. Yeah.
Lindsay, can I just a comment about the potassium? I just want
Yeah,
just
of
an
course.
observation, and Ray might have something to add to this, but I'll be quite honest. When I was at Olds College, I used to have to use IPNI photos of potassium deficiency because they just didn't exist in our crops. I'll be very honest. The last few years, I have found, and we have verified, some potassium deficient fields in Alberta. On fields that I would not have suspected. Like when I drive into the field, I wouldn't have suspected potassium. And we looked at it, and I'm going like, could this be potassium deficiency? And again, we took tissue tests and soil tests, and it was verified. I think we get somewhat complacent in Western Canada. Well, we got lots of potassium, we got lots of potash in our soils. We don't need to apply it. And I think we're starting to see a bit of a shift in some of our fields, and I think it's something we need to look at a little more closely. But I've just noticed it in the last 5 years, just more and more potassium deficiencies. So I just want to make that comment.
Yeah, absolutely. And so some good comments here from Ray and Pete as well to support that. The dry weather is going to potentially impact K availability as well. And Pete says, of course, as you reduce tillage, potash can become an issue as well. So also when it's dry, you tend to work the ground less if you're not already in a full zero till scenario. So, but it is a good point, because I think in Western Canada complacency is probably a good one. Maybe habit is another. The soil, for the most part, provides, adequate potassium, that it's not a huge concern, but definitely could be, for sure. We're actually running out of time. Gord Specksnyder's got a really great question here about sort of what's the next state-of-the-art, coolest tool ever for in-field nutrient testing. What do you think, guys? What are we going to get for in-field, either soil or plant, in crop? Colin, maybe if you want to start.
Yeah, sure. I'm really looking forward to finding out more on the soil sensors. So I've heard, and I have no experience with it, but there's some soil probes that are in the country, anyways, that have the capability of testing that soil while you're in the field. So getting a digital readout of what's going on in that soil as you've got the probe in the ground. I have no way of knowing how accurate it is, how correlated it is to our soils. But that kind of technology is kind of mind blowing and incredibly cool to me.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Jack, how about you?
I would agree. The soil sensors. I mean, we've also got the NutriScan system that's out there where you can get very quick turnaround on analysis. But I would agree with Colin. What do the numbers that these things will generate? What are they telling us? And I think there's going to be a requirement for some work to be done to calibrate those values into meaningful. What's this mean? So that when we're comparing apples to grapefruit, does this number, how many pounds? So if I'm going to use this information to generate a recommendation, what does that number mean? How many pounds of phosphorus do I need to apply based on the levels that are there? And so I think there's going to be a need for a lot of work done on calibration, but it's certainly exciting. I mean, that's the thing. It's certainly exciting to be able to have access to quicker and more immediate information on your soils and nutrient levels, and that's great.
Yeah, it certainly does feel that there are some really neat technologies in the works already being field tested, but also when we talk about soil health and soil interactions and soil nutrient interactions, there's also this gigantic amount of what we don't know. And so the good news is, Colin, you're going to have a very long, illustrious career ahead of you because there are so many things that you are going to have to figure out. And Jack can guide you through that process. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just volunteering people now. If Pete's volunteering you to go do soil tests, I'm volunteering mentorships. Just kidding. Okay. No, this has been so fantastic. I will say I am one that also would really love to see, I think a couple years ago to Agrotechnica, I think Sean and Calvin spoke with someone who had made, it's like a soil sensor, but it actually like rolls through. It really neat kind of thing. I think that's being tested as well. So there's some really cool technology out there that we'll have to just wait and see. All right. Thank you, Jack. Thank you, Colin. This has been absolutely so much fun. I hope that our audience has enjoyed it as well. I do appreciate all the comments and the questions. For sure, and I know as we get into the summer that it's tough to necessarily be at your desk on a Monday night, but I do appreciate everybody hanging in. And we'll be back next week, July 4th, and hopefully, I'm still trying to hammer this out, talking relay cropping and intercropping. So, Colin, your one picture we didn't get to might have fit in here, even though it was not. Anyway, and thank you, of course, to our sponsors, Adama Canada, to Mind Your Farm Business, and to our flea beetle webinar July 5th. Jack, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me on.
All right. And Colin, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. It's been fun.
All righty. You're a brave man. I'll say it again. All right. Okay. And of course, head to realagriculture.com/agronomists to make sure that you sign up for those CEU credits. And I am your host, Lindsay Smith, and I will be back next Monday, July 4th, 8 p.m. Eastern for another episode of The Agronomists. Cheers, everybody.